know it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Z, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel, broadcasting live from Studio Z.
Makes me act the way I do.
This is Undead Live Evening Edition, reporting from the front lines of the zombie apocalypse. We have your back morning, noon, and night, whether you're dead, undead, recently deceased, or fully alive. This is Friday, October 16th, and I'm Athena Actipus.
And I'm Dave Lundberg-Kenrick, and this evening we will look at the perils of privilege in nature, the vulnerability of mammals becoming mombies, and we'll take a deep dive under the sea to look at undead marine cancers. We'll also learn about childhood games of the zombie apocalypse and talk about why many zombies can't walk without lurching, yet are able to dance to a beat. But before we begin, we do have another...
are we going to have Steve and Larry on?
So they can't be here right now. They did send us a video. I'm not sure where they are. They sent this thing in, and I think we should check it out. I know last time, I
want to know what's going on. So definitely play the video.
All right, here we go.
How much education do I have? Years, graduate degree, medical degree. See, I had to look up how to barricade the door online. Put the wood here, and I just hold it up here. Try to get a grip on myself. Okay. I guess there's some important questions here, and I'm supposed to be some kind of expert. One is, could a mattress against a window hold back a zombie? I mean, they can't think. They can't even open doors. They're not going to know that that's not like a wall there. And two, why, for the love of everything that matters, why doesn't anybody ever build a mattress with handles on it to lift around? Okay, for the finishing touches, I've boarded up the windows outside the house. Nothing can get in this now. Okay, this room is like impossible to barricade. There's windows on everything, Pheasanton. There's no way I can keep them out. But we're there. That's not a bad barricade. It's like a couch and pillows and stuff like that. No, it's fine, dog. It's fine. There are no zombies out there. It's fine, dog. There are no zombies out. There are no It's something.
Oh my God, Dad, are you okay? Are you?
Why? I'm fine.
Take off your glasses.
Why do you want me to take my glasses
Your
off?
eyes.
You just keep
Your
asking
eyes.
me. There's
You look
nothing.
so
No,
stunted.
there's nothing wrong.
Ooh. Wait a second. Did you hear? Did they say anything, or they just sent that?
I just got it. I just got it in an envelope. And so, so the last we saw Larry. He'd seen somebody get attacked, and then he went to sort of board up, or not to board up. He went home, and he was going to be calling to see if anybody could take care of anything. Now we've got Steve basically just boarding up his house.
I don't know if this is because he saw something else, or if maybe he's just agitated. I don't know. He kind of seemed like he was not so well last time we talked to him.
His eyes, it's interesting. Last time we saw Larry see this person basically getting eaten, and then he sort of drove home to try to protect himself. And then we sort of went into this whole discussion of all these things that are happening in society and whether or not we can protect ourselves. And now we've got Steve at home, but I don't know if he's safe at home. I don't know. He looks messed up. So like Alana says, his cough sounds much worse. He sounds unhinged. His dog sounded unhinged. So
Erica's concerned about the dog, actually.
I don't think he's eaten the dog as of yet. We saw the dog in the video, but he didn't look good. And so this is interesting. Carlos says he thinks the barricades might make it hard for Steve's daughter to escape. So it's Well, and one last thing. Jeff is pointing out that right now it is a man
dog world out there. So yeah,
Right.
okay.
It is.
You know what?
So-
I don't want to talk about this anymore. I think we should move on to the rest of our show. Let's move on to the rest of our show.
Sure.
Yeah. So our first expert this evening is author, physician, and evolutionary biologist Barbara Natterson Horowitz, here to talk to us about the ancient roots of animal privilege, and in particular, the fact that there are no level playing fields in nature. Welcome to Undead Live, Barbara.
Well, I'm really glad to be here because I have a pressing question, and that is, what controls the destinies of lives on Earth? Well, I want to start by answering that question by looking at the spotted hyena. There are about 50,000 spotted hyenas on Earth, and some of the best studied hyenas are actually living in two regions, the Ngorongoro Conservation Area by the Ngorongoro Crater and the Serengeti. Well, it is a pretty interesting situation because the Ngorongoro Crater is really, really full of food. There are about 219 prey items per kilometer squared there versus the Serengeti National Park, where there's 3.3 prey items per square kilometer. And so it turns out how you fare as a young spotted hyena is very different based on where you are born and whether there are resources or whether there are not resources, whether it's safe or whether it's dangerous. And so I would ask the first question, can hyenas have privilege? In other words, are there advantages that are shaping the destinies of young hyenas? Well, to answer the question of whether hyenas can have privilege, let's look at the definition of privilege. A special advantage, right, or immunity granted or available only to a particular individual or group. Well, I would say being born in the Ngorongoro Crater is such a special advantage, and so, yes, I would suggest that hyenas can have privilege. All right, well, it's one thing to have privilege based on where you're born, whether you are born in Ngorongoro or Serengeti, but what about within a group? Is there privilege within this flock of blackbirds, within this school of minnows? Are there level playing fields in nature? As part of a study that I did for a book I co-wrote with Catherine Bowers, we conducted several systematic reviews looking for evidence of components of human privilege across chordates and even invertebrates. And what we found surprised us and convinced us that indeed there are no level playing fields in nature. Let's take a look. These are a few of the animals who inherit territory. In other words, some young individuals, if they're lucky enough to have parents who have territory, will inherit it from their parents. Others will not. Here is a quick phylogeny showing how widespread inheritance of territory is across vertebrates and invertebrates. These are some of the species in which if a young individual has parents who have status, that is high rank, they will inherit it as part of a bloodline. We know that that is a common occurrence in human societies, and it turns out inheritance of parental rank from bees all the way to primate mammals. Widespread. Yep. Jump in.
This slide, it's a little hard for me to see what's going on. So can you just explain real quick what's happening in this slide?
Sure, the phylogeny right here,
yeah,
inheritance.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we have here is a hemispheric phylogeny. So right here is the common privileged ancestor. And this is actually a kind of, this is the common ancestor with an arthropod and a human. And what we see over here in the lavender are insects. We have fish over here. We have our avian species over here in the northwest quadrant, and then we have mammals. And this royal crown that pops up, I'll do it again, are the species in which we found inheritance of parental rank. That is bloodline inheritance. If your mother is a royal hyena, the highest hyena in the clan, then you as her daughter and even as her son inherit that territory.
So, Barb, what this is telling us is that there seems to be some evolutionary basis here for this inheritance of rank. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm not suggesting that this is a homologous process, that it's conserved, but I am suggesting that, yes, it is widespread among social animals, and that it actually, if you spend a moment or two thinking about it, why wouldn't it be? If the fitness of an animal's offspring is going to determine a parent's fitness is shaped by the fitness of their offspring. And we know that in social animal groups, high rank, resources, etc., is highly entrained with fitness. It would be hard to argue that a reasonable hypothesis would be that inheritance of rank would occur, would make sense, let's put it that way. And it would be, it's not a surprise. It's just that we think about this in such human terms. These are one of the most potent forms of privilege in human life are the networks that some young people inherit from their parents, and of course others don't have those resources or those networks, and they don't. And we see again social network inheritance. This is only a few of the animal groups in which this is seen, and of course this is a powerful form of an advantage that some have and others don't. Again, we have this phylogeny, the common privileged ancestor. We have bees and ants, termites and cockroaches over here, and on this end we've got our macaques. And once more, we see inheritance of parental social networks is widespread. What this is suggesting, Athena, in my mind, is that several things. One is that the fact that it's even a little bit disruptive or surprising, I think speaks to a kind of human exceptionalism where we tend to see certain aspects of human society as uniquely ours. But when we take a moment and peel back that blindfold of human exceptionalism, we start to see continuities, and these give us the green light to begin asking questions about why. Finally, parental intervention. There are many animals, including fish, but most of these are mammals, where a parent can intervene on behalf of their youngster. And if their offspring doesn't have what it takes to get ahead in a so-called merit-based contest, they lend a hand. And of course, this is seen in human societies as well. Don't need to say more about that. The totality of all of these systematic reviews led us to believe that indeed privilege is widespread and ubiquitous across invertebrates and vertebrate species, from inheritance of social networks, rank, territory, and other resources, and parental intervention. So what does this mean? Well, it challenges us to ask this fundamental question, which really I think makes sense in the context of the zombie medical context, because it's asking us what shapes an individual's destiny. Is it personal agency, or is it something else? Is it advantage, or the accumulation of advantages that some have and some don't? And this is a bit of a boring slide, but it is a generic slide. It's not just for humans. I happen to be using a mammal model here, but you're looking at pregestation, gestation, and then the life cycle. And we see that the quality of nutrition, the safety of the environment, the socioeconomic status, the resources, the networks, all of these are going to be shaping opportunities and outcomes. And so let's go back to the spotted hyenas and just check that out, see how that works, and then take a moment to reflect on what we can learn about that and how we can apply it to better understanding inequities in our human societies. So there is a group of hyena biologists who've been studying these clans in the Gora Gora for almost 30 years. And they have educated us a lot about what determines what hyenas succeed and which hyenas do not succeed. And by succeed, of course, we're talking about surviving and thriving, and in some instances, actually rising in the social hierarchy. Well, first of all, highly determinative of outcomes is the status of a hyena's mother. If she is a high status hyena, like one of the queens, then when she is gestating her young, they are the recipients of superb nutrition, and therefore their immune systems and their musculoskeletal systems are being shaped and strengthened. Even after delivery, they're getting higher quality lactation. And by the way, they wean earlier because they're growing so fast. And that gives them the advantage of going out and getting meat. And that gives them an additional advantage. It's advantage on advantage on advantage. If you have a high status mother, you are more protected and you have social networks that you immediately become part of. And finally, you receive assistance with your own competitions. And of course, what shapes an individual's destiny? Well, for hyenas, the place of birth, whether you're born in the Ngorongoro crater or in the Serengeti, has a lot to do with it. And we know that that is absolutely the case in the human world as well. So returning finally to that question, are there level playing fields in nature? I would say absolutely not. And knowing that, the next time you see a so-called merit-based competition in a David Attenborough documentary, ask yourself, is there such thing as a merit-based competition? I'm going to end by just reading a quick quote from our book, Wildhood. To build airplanes that fly, humans needed to understand the laws of gravity. To develop antibiotics to fight infection, we had to study the strategies of pathogens. Understanding privilege in the natural world is critical in the effort to build a more equitable society. All right, bring it on.
Barb, thank you. Wow. So that was just really changed my perspective on looking at the idea of privilege. I mean, I think we often think of it as a human thing.
Yeah, I did. I was kind of nervous actually about even using the word because I associated it completely with sort of the modern context of socioeconomic status and race and many of the most important conversations that are happening on the campuses where I teach and in the larger world. But as we looked at the definition of privilege and we started looking really specifically at these components, it became clear that this was yet another case of human exceptionalism, the assumption that these components of our lives are uniquely ours, was just serving as a blindfold.
Yeah, Dave.
So at your end quote, you sort of say, that understanding this can help us sort of understand it in the human world. Can you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, well, one of the things that, it's hard, you want to be kind of politically agnostic when you're doing science, but, I don't have to be that way right now. So, right. I think like a lot of people are acutely aware and just increasingly that the inequalities in this world are getting worse, and that centuries of efforts to reverse the suffering that's associated with inequality it's not really working. And one of the things in general that we know is that if you trivialize a problem, then you're going to come up with trivial solutions. The analogy that I like to use is to think about germ theory or gravity. So let's use gravity first. So, gravity was identified centuries before the Wright brothers built an airplane that could take off and remain aloft. And germ theory, it was, fortunately, by the time Fleming looked at the mold, he was able to understand what it meant. And we now have this entire ability to counter infections. This has been one of the great triumphs of modern medicine. Well, if we're going to deal with this problem of inequality, we need to understand the foundational principles, the rules of privilege. What determines whether, how does it work? What determines whether one individual will do well and another will not? There are opportunities to identify these by looking broadly across the animal kingdom. But if we're locked into this human exceptionalism, if we don't even bring biologists and to the table to have conversations about privilege, then we're never going to have access to that information.
Can we go back real quick? Can you run through, you said there were 4 things, you had a slide of the 4 things that lead to privilege in the animal kingdom. Can you just run those by me one more time?
Sure, there are far more than four, but the four that I mentioned were inheriting territory or resources.
Uh-huh.
Right, and that happens in different ways. There's bequeathal in some species. There's transgenerational, almost like generation skipping trusts, that kind of thing. There's lots of different models for that, but territory inheritance and resource inheritance, and the two are intertwined. There's actually inheriting the rank of your parent. So it's like a bloodline. It's a bloodline. The hyenas, the spotted hyenas, are a perfect example. There's a queen, and her daughter, by virtue of her being her daughter, literally is high ranking. She doesn't have to do anything to earn it, right? It's like Prince William or whatever.
Sure.
The third is it's inheriting your parents' social networks and the protection and the information that you get from being part of those networks. And then there's parental intervention. And that's this like wild thing you see in some circumpontine primates, and of course in these spotted hyenas, where like in the hyenas, the high-ranking mother, the queen, will watch her daughter engaging in conflict. And if it looks like her daughter is not going to come out on the winning end of things, she intervenes and makes sure that there's a winning outcome for her daughter. Huh. Right. But there are a lot of other ways that privilege like wins its way into the lives of animals.
Yeah, we have a comment from Ilana Rain. She noted that there's a bit of a analogy here with helicopter parenting. And that actually brings up, I think, a really important and interesting point and question, which is, Barb, what's the difference between sort of parental care, parental investment, like parents taking care of their kids and, doing what they should do as parents, versus these processes that can ultimately lead to greater, inequality. I mean, maybe there isn't a clean line, and that's part of why this is such a tough problem.
Yeah, I think there isn't a clean line, and I think like a lot of the information that we can learn when we broadly look across species at behavior is that there's just a tremendous amount of variation. But what I think we definitely can say is that that there are animal groups where you see it intensified, and there are circumstances, ecological changes, where you see privilege being sort of harsher on those animals who have fewer resources. So I think that, and the flip side is there are situations where you see that really relax. So there is this opportunity, if we really pull back and look at this, species spanning perspective, and we find like specific aspects of privilege to consider, where we can really begin to sort of understand how this thing operates, what this huge, powerful, hidden hand that is exerting so much control on the fates of young individuals on planet Earth, how it works.
So when people what would you say would be the takeaway for people who are trying to use this to level the playing field among humans?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, frankly, this idea of a level playing field, in my opinion, and again, I feel no obligation to be politically agnostic here, right? But I just don't think it's a scientifically justifiable possibility. I mean, for one thing, if you think about how epigenetics works to shape phenotypes, an animal, even a gestating fish, right, who was, an egg deposited by a mother and abandoned, right, with that the quality of the goo, the nutrition, the location of the eggs, whether they are in a location where there are greater or fewer stress signals, all of those things are going to be shaping the phenotype of the offspring. And that is going to give those fry, when they are hatched, an advantage or a disadvantage. So I would say this idea of level playing fields is a fantasy, and that knowing that we have to really dig in, do really excellent science to understand all of the places where advantage is and is not, and especially those areas where we haven't been paying attention to it. We don't think it's there, where privilege is, let's say, invisible to the human eye.
So we have one of our correspondents, in fact, our zombie health correspondent, Jeff Gasson, who also happens to be the world's leading expert on zombie health and an evolutionary biologist as well. Jeff, you have some thoughts, questions, ideas you want to share with us?
Yes, like a quick question. So I remember, vaguely remember at this point in my life, a talk by Robert Sapolsky where he was studying savanna baboons, and there was a point where there was a eating of meat in the particular group of baboons he was studying, and it sort of, given the sort of randomness of who it had killed and actually killed more of those at the top of the social hierarchy, sort of led to a more egalitarian social structure in those particular baboons. So I was wondering if you knew of any animal, any species or any populations of animals where there was more egalitarian structure, and if those sort of principles could be applied to help structure human social systems in a way that would benefit more people instead of sort of this nepotism and inheritance of social rank.
Yeah, well, that literally is exactly what our group is studying right now. Is to begin doing. We're embarking on a very systematic look at a wide range of animal societies. I mean, lions are sort of one of the animals where that have sort of this egalitarian, are known to be egalitarian, more egalitarian. But privilege is more than just sort of the leadership style and the political system. It is really also about the stress levels of the individuals, and even within these lion groups, there are dominant subordinates, and so but what your point is well taken, and that is precisely what we want to do. Our extremely big swing here is to see whether we can identify universal principles, foundational rules that determine that really determine whether a society is more equal or less equal.
Thank you, Barb. And we have another one of our correspondents here as well, who is going to join us. Carlo Maley, you're an evolutionary biologist, our zombie evolution correspondent. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, Barbara, I really appreciate this evolutionary view that these things are built into our genes, and they've been selected because the parents that can confer the status enhance their own fitness by enhancing their children's fitness. But I wonder if you thought more about how we can apply this to like our efforts towards social justice. And for me, this connects with some of the sort of service level analysis of the failure of communism. That communism was sort of based on this principle of giving everybody what they need, but it didn't have this feedback of incentives that what the work we put in wasn't rewarded. And so it didn't match with our biology. And it seems what I get from what you're saying is our basic biology has this incentives to invest in our children and give them a leg up. And so what can we do about setting up our society to, if not level the playing field, at least tilt it a little bit less? How can we adjust policy based on this assumption that people are going to be trying to undermine that policy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would answer it with two responses. First, in animal societies where a high degree of cooperation is needed, we would predict that there would be less toxic privilege, let's say, where the destiny of all individuals are entrained to some extent, right? It would make more sense to have a more equitable system. But the other answer I want to offer has to do with your question about how we can use this information to really make a difference and right now. And one fundamental contribution that we can make is to just point out that these advantages are not just within one generation; they are transgenerational. And this is this aggregation of nutritional benefits and informational benefits and all kinds of advantages that are not just one generation, two generations, but probably multiple generations. And I think knowing that exists biologically allows us to take a step back from from this, from the, I think, irresponsible and just irresponsible claim that that what's happened historically within a few generations past is not having an impact on the outcomes and the destinies of young individuals. Because, you know, if you want to move away from the human culture wars and just talk about how it works in the animal kingdom, the truth is what happens generations before is going to impact the destiny of young lives today.
So can you talk a little bit about the nature versus ethics? The ought does not imply ought here. That just because it's neutral doesn't mean it's okay.
Let me pull in Amy's question here too. She says, you know, what are the consequences from a broader sort of societal perspective of even just showing that privilege is sort of natural? Is there a way to kind of make sure that people don't use this take this information and use it in the wrong direction?
Thanks, Amy. When I played tennis, they called that an underhand serve, so or a lob. But thank you. A softball, I guess. So obviously, the word natural has been, thrown around and misused, and it means to some people it's good, and some people it's normative, and some people whatever. Let's just take a step back and say we know that if you really look at the biodiversity in terms of behavior, anything you can think of, you can find. So we know that cannibalism, infanticide, necrophilia, there are a lot of things that have been well documented in the natural world. But we don't say, hey, we see those ducks engaging in necrophilia, so hey, man, we should say A-OK for human society. No, of course we don't. And so I think we're at a stage where we no longer have to worry so much about just identifying what's in nature, as though if we find it in nature, then someone's going to say, oh, that means it's okay in human society. I mean, there may be some people who choose to say that. I wouldn't pay any attention to them. Instead, I think we're at a new stage where we have a responsibility to actually look closely and carefully and broadly and deeply at the diversity of animal behavior to understand these universal principles so that we can create a better human society, among other things.
So also thinking about, how Carla was saying it's natural. It's not, well.
It's called the appeal to nature fallacy. Yeah.
Not actually going back to how you were saying that it conveys an advantage to sort of want our own offspring to do well, right? How do we how do we handle this in a way where really, since that's almost, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably fairly universal among people, where as we're making policy, I suspect there's going to be a lot of people who are like, how can we make this playing field completely equitable, but especially doubly equitable for me, and my kids? And so how do we sort of balance, how do we implement these things when there is sort of, I think all of us have this natural sort of tendency to maybe want our kids to thrive?
Yeah, the analogy is, look, I mean, when I get really, really hungry and there's food on the table, I want to dive in and just grab it. But there's table manners. There's things that we learn as part of human culture. And the same thing is true for paying taxes, right? We can, it's not the most natural thing in the world to take money that you've worked hard to get and to whatever might not feel natural, right? It turns out that one of the ways in which human society is probably unique, although I say that with a big gulp, is that we can codify and legislate behavior that helps contain impulses that we know exist, but we don't think are very positive for creating the kind of world that we want to be living in.
Well, one of my friends argues for 100% inheritance tax.
Oh.
Seems like that also then changes incentives, though, right?
I'd also be curious if your friend would be comfortable with that being distributed globally. Because
I think it's an ethical position, and it's based on this whole idea of the striving for that level playing field. So I think he would say it's universal.
But of course, the issue is, right, it's not just about money when it comes to inheritance. There are many ways that parents can give their kids a leg up, right? Right,
Sure,
Barbara?
Yeah, I mean, information. There are a lot of examples. There's some wonderful cetacean examples of just. I mean, in elephants you see this, in whales. Information, and in certain bird species, the knowledge that an informed parent has can make all the difference. That's the advantage, and then there's just all the biological advantages of bringing in better food, better nutrition. Where a mother or father bird places the nest, what branch is going to make a difference. But actually, and I love to look left on the evolutionary timeline, and then more left and more left and more left. And all of a sudden you realize that even in a half centimeter cancer, a tumor, I'm addressing this to Carlo and Athena, but there are going to be privileged cells and unprivileged cells. There are going to be some cells that are perhaps closer to the vascular supply, and others that may be more exposed to the chemotherapy when it emerges. And so this is not anthropomorphism, right? This is really, I think, recognizing that there are these universal kind of ecological principles that we've been afraid to apply more broadly. I'll end, but one of my favorite things to think about is why this is like so sort of surprising in the first place. And I think a big part of it is that we've been overly trained not to anthropomorphize. And what is anthropomorphizing? Well, I was taught that it's the projection of human characteristics onto an animal, but it turns out the actual definition is the projection of human characteristics onto an animal in a way that's not scientifically justifiable. And today, with comparative genomics and molecular phylogenetics and neuroscience, et cetera, I mean, if there's a scientific error to be made, I don't think it's going to be anthropomorphism. I think it's going to be the human exceptionalism that underlies it.
Barb, that's absolutely wonderful and fascinating. I have one last question for you, which is, you were talking about this issue of information as one of these ways that parents can privilege their offspring. So it seems like maybe there's a role here for education and informing people and having, scientific information be more broadly available, and information about the state of the world be more broadly available. Do you see a role here for education in helping to correct some of these inequities that often, emerge and then are exacerbated by our human nature?
Oh, definitely. I think that's where this idea of can we bio-inspire a better society, right? So, we've bio-inspired, regenerating limbs, and there's bioinspiration, and biomimicry is like the hottest thing. Well, can we bioinspire a more equitable society? And I think the answer is yes. And information is a fantastic example of something that we can put resources in as a society, that we can recognize it as a leveler of playing fields. It's not going to completely level things, but it's a leveler, and we can legislate and create structures that promote education and the dissemination of vital information.
Thank you so much, Barb. That's a really awesome shift of perspective, I think, for all of us in terms of thinking about the nature of privilege and, just how natural privilege is, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily something that we want to propagate without sort of considering how can we equalize a playing field for people. So thanks so much for sharing your brains with us. So next up, we know since the zombie apocalypse began that live fast, die young has been a slogan, a rule of thumb for a lot of us. But since that has happened, we haven't really considered what are the evolutionary risks that come from being a fast living mammal. Here to talk with us today about the risks of mammalian mombification is evolutionary biologist Amy Boddy. Welcome, Amy. You're muted, Amy.
Of course. Hi, thank you for having me. This has been a wonderful discussion so far. Yeah, so today I wanted to just briefly introduce my idea and then open it up for discussion. And today I wanted to talk about the cost of reproductive strategies, different reproductive strategies across the animal kingdom, and how that can influence the health. And so we'll circle back to health at the very end of this. So some of you may know, especially following up from Barb's wonderful talk, that different animals have evolved different strategies for their reproductive output depending on their ecology, right? And it's a consistent formula. It's a trade-off. It's called life history theory, right? And so this live fast, die young strategy really comes from the ecology in which the animal evolved in, right? And so the ecology is a very important component of this. And so organisms, say, that have very large litter sizes, most of the time you can predict that they may have higher predation within their ecology, right? And so it is an adaptive strategy to then live fast, reproduce a lot, and then die young, all right? And that is quite different from organisms that grow slowly. So for example, over here, the elephant that takes a long time to grow, has one offspring every few years, is pregnant for almost 2 years, which is frightening to think about, is really on the opposite extreme of this live fast, die young strategy, where they invest much in their offspring and only have a few over the course of their lifetime. And so this is all about trade-offs, right? And I said the ecology can predict if an animal is going to go on to have many babies, a large litter size, and a short lifespan, or very few offspring, and you invest heavily in this offspring, right? And so what does this mean at the biological level? So we are interested in studying cancer biology and the maintenance of your cells. And so we all start out with very similar cells, but how we build those cells and how we maintain them and make sure no mutations happen in them can be quite different across the animal kingdom. And I would argue that it fits really nicely on this live fast, die young strategy, or live slow and invest in your offspring. And so when you think of, say, you're an opossum right here, and you have so many babies that they have to like sit on your head and stuff like that. I don't know. There's so many of them, or a ferret, and these species have quite short lifespans, but many offspring. And how well can an organism invest in their soma before they need to start generating more offspring, right? And how good did they build that offspring up? And so when you actually look at the cancer biology of these organisms, you see that, yeah, they're pretty good at reproductive output, but what we find is that these individuals are quite vulnerable to cancer, as opposed to organisms over here on this slow strategy. We see a lot less cancer, especially for organisms as big as an elephant, based on the number of cells that they have. We see a lot less cancer in these organisms. And so that I would like to open it up. That was just my brief spiel. I would love to open it up for discussion and talking more about this trade-off between the ecology, the reproductive output, and then the influence on health after that.
Thank you, Amy. Can you tell us a little bit about, why it is that this idea of life history theory, why is this important for us to understand if we want to get a better grip on, why some animals are more susceptible to cancer than others?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So life history theory provides you this really nice theoretical framework on energetic trade-offs. Okay, and so say you have to do 3 tasks. You have to grow big. You have to maintain that body. There's always viruses that you might get sick with, and then you also have to pass on your genes, right? So reproduction. So you have these like 3 things that you have to put energy into, and then there's strategies, right, on where you should put that energy and when. And if you have a bunch of predators lurking around that might eat you one day, you might decide not to grow big, and you might go right into reproducing and having a bunch of babies.
So now when we're talking about sort of, these decisions, right, this is something that's happening at the evolutionary timescale, right, where the organism isn't like, going out there and saying, oh, it looks like things aren't so good right now, let me reproduce faster. It's happening on the evolutionary timescale. Although, I mean, there are some times where you can have these adjustments that happen in the lifetime of an organism, but that's not what you're talking about right now, right?
That's not what I'm talking about. No, I'm talking over long evolutionary timescales. What we see happening is there's selection for these strategies. And of course, there is a little bit of phenotypic plasticity within this. And especially like if you think about within humans, we have different timing of birth and growth and all that, but it's still operating within our evolutionary parameters. So yeah, it's set. Yeah.
I'm going to bring in our zombie evolution correspondent, Carlo Maley, to join the conversation as well.
Great. Great. Really interesting stuff, Amy. Is there something about the ecology of species that make them more or less zombifiable?
Yeah. Oh, well, what is the strategy of a zombie, right? Are you considering them a live fast, die young? Because they don't die.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking about, I guess, as being a host to a zombification agent.
Oh, a host to a zombification agent. Well,
or possibly being zombified by your children.
Right. So yeah, I mean, the ecology is quite important, and you think about it in terms of basically predators and resources are 2 of the things within the ecology that would influence your life history strategy, right? You can buffer it with resources, but if there's high predators, then you're going to have to start reproducing quickly if you want to pass your genes on to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if is there any insights of life history theory for what makes for the zombifiers? It seems like there's a lot of parasitic wasps, and I don't know why wasps, zombify various hosts.
Oh, you're saying the species that zombify wasps and manipulate them?
No, sorry, I'm flipping from my earlier question now to why is it that some species or some clades, some groups of species are really good at zombifying other things? Like it seems like there's a whole clade of wasps that can parasitize and zombify, cockroaches and a variety of other organisms. I'm wondering if there's anything we can say about why wasps.
Well, I mean, one thing to just note is like a lot of those, like they're parasitizing other species' parental investment. So their life history strategy, in some ways, it's very high parental investment, which we would think of as a slow life history strategy, but they're sort of outsourcing that parental investment to other species that have a slow life history strategy, right? Of investing in offspring, or they're investing just in the strategy for co-opting the whole body, the soma of another organism to make it into baby food.
So
so throwing that one of those energy budgets for the trade-off at something else, right? Yeah. So you don't have to deal with that trade-off. You have more resources for yourself.
And maybe to get to my earlier question, maybe being slow life history means that you have all these tools for parental investment that are then capable of being hijacked and redirected to some other effort.
Although you may be more capable of being hijacked, but you probably have good defenses for it. right? Because you might have experience being hijacked time and time again if you live longer. Where, say, the poor little possum over there that has tons of babies and then dies, maybe could get hijacked, but that's their strategy. They don't have any defenses really against it. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. So, Dave, do you have anything that you want to add in before we go on to our next guest?
I mean, there was one question that I really liked from Alana, which was, would a mombie, let's see, what did it say? Do you think a mombie would want to protect other mombies' young?
Yes.
All right.
You see that often, and I mean, I guess it depends. Well, it depends. And usually the slow life history, it depends on the hierarchy of the animal that we're studying. Elephants would actually, we see evidence of elephants adopting other mombies young if they need to. So yes.
So that's more things that have a slow life history strategy. Are they going to be more likely to adopt? Probably.
I'd make that prediction. As long as, I mean, no, because you can see crosses and nursing of different young in dogs and cats as well. So that's an interesting question.
Well, Amy, you are really at the forefront of the field of mombification. So we're looking forward to seeing what discoveries you make in the coming months and years. And we hope you'll join us back here to give us your updates as you get them.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Amy. So undead cancers, they're not only a risk for mammals, but marine life, right?
Yeah, so that is one of the things that we're going to be talking about now. So in the oceans, many clams and mussels are actually infected by contagious cancers. Cancers where the whole cell actually jumps from animal to animal, spreading through the population like an underwater zombie pandemic.
It's super, super gross.
Yeah. Well, here to share his work on the topic, we have Michael Metzger. Michael, welcome to Undead Live.
Hi, thanks for having me here. It's great to talk about this.
You're muted, Michael.
Oh,
no, I can hear him.
There we are. Great.
Yes.
Oh, we're good.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Yes, we can hear you. Michael. So Michael, tell us, what is going on underwater? Is there an apocalypse happening that we are unaware of?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of these diseases that we really have been totally unaware of until pretty recently. So I think I can talk a little bit just briefly about transmissible cancers in general, and then talk about the soft-shell clams and the other bivalves that we are studying now. So contagious cancers, it's a pretty bizarre topic. There's really only a few that have been known up until very recently. So there are transmissible cancers in dogs and in Tasmanian devils. And like you said, these are cancers where the cells themselves jump from one animal to the animal and spread through the environment. And now there are things in humans like HPV and other viruses where viruses can cause cancer. But in those cases, the virus, if it induces cancer in an animal, in a person, those cancer cells stay within that individual person. Like if I get a cancer, you cannot get the cancer cells from me. So there aren't any zombie cancers that we know of in humans now. So we're safe on that particular zombie apocalypse. But when we see these transmissible cancers, they've been in a couple rare cases in the dogs and devils. And what we started looking at, we didn't really know this is what we were going to see when we started looking. So we started looking at soft shell clams. These are the steamer clams that are sort of ubiquitous in New England. And they had this disease that was called disseminated neoplasia. People didn't quite know what it was or what was causing it. They knew it was cancers that would occur in these big outbreaks. And so we started looking at this when I was a postdoc, thinking that it was going to be a virus. And it turns out there was no virus here that we've ever found. Instead, what happens is the whole cells themselves will jump from one animal to the next, spreading through the environment and infecting other animals, essentially sort of as a clonal allograft. And so how we know this, how we figured this out, is by looking at the DNA of the cancers and comparing it to the hosts, to the animals that have it. Different clams in the environment, they're quite diverse. But if you look at different animals, they're always different from each other. There are differences between one clam and the next, just like there are between one person and the next. But if you look at all the cells within an individual, they all have the same genotypes. They all look pretty much the same. But when we look at these animals with these transmissible cancers, it's totally different. What we see is that the genotypes of the host do not match those of the cancer. But when we look at the cancers, they're basically cancers from New York all the way to Maine and Prince Edward Island. All those cancers look like they came from a single genotype. They all came from a single individual. And that animal is sort of the founder animal for this whole thing. It's just a long dead animal. And then these cells are basically turning into sort of a parasitic organism that is spreading continuously through the population from animal to animal. And it's sort of, we think this is happening through filter feeding, and so these cells are engrafting into another one, but they basically fill up the lymph, the circulatory fluid of these animals, and then disseminate through all the tissues. So essentially, at the most serious stages of this disease, the animal itself is more cancer. It's more another animal than it is itself, just because it's so filled with these cancer cells. Now, in addition to this one species, we've seen it in actually a number of different species. This is not just a one-off. We started looking at these soft-shell clam transmissible cancers through work with a lot of other collaborators. We found them in mussels, first in the Pacific Northwest. There's at least 2 species in cockles. And in these carpet shell clams, we actually saw a case where the cancer was not from that clam itself. It came from not just a different individual, but from a whole different species. These are related species, but this is the first time we saw cross-species transmission of cancer. And it actually looks like the cancer spreads, but then isn't able to infect the original host. So we're seeing a lot of cases of these. This seems to be pretty widespread. And then I just want to talk about one in particular in mussels. The first one we found was this cancer up in the Pacific Northwest of the US. More recently, we've looked at samples with other collaborations of other mussel species in Europe and in South America. And we found that those were transmissible cancers. And then when we started looking at the sequence, we found something even more surprising, and that they were the identical cancer. So we have a single lineage of cancer that came from a single mussel, spreading essentially worldwide, all the way from Europe to South America, and then around into the Pacific Ocean. And
Wow.
so I just had to show that because I needed to show some large spreading arrows for a zombie on a map. So now we have these 3 types of transmissible cancers: Tasmanian devils, the canine transmissible venereal tumor, and then essentially this whole array of bivalve transmissible neoplasias. And I just wanted to end with a picture of the before times when we would actually all be grouping together without masks, talking to each other, digging up clams.
So we had a question while you were doing that of, if we were to eat these clams with the cancer, would that have any sort of effect on us?
No. So I need to make sure that I get that question a lot. I've probably eaten a lot more clams since I started this project than I ever did beforehand. So for the most part, when we look at these transmissible cancer lineages, they're almost all, if you see one, it's within its own species. We've seen these cases of cross-species transmission in these carpet shell clams, and then from one mussel species to a different mussel species, but those are all quite closely related.
Okay.
People have done a lot of experiments back sort of even before we knew quite what we were looking at, where they took the mussel cancer and then tried to inject it in the soft shell clams or vice versa, and that just doesn't work. So even that is too big of a jump. So humans are safe.
So I know there's a question here from Amy, but I also have one other question. Does it have detrimental effects to the clams?
Yes, it's essentially lethal in most cases.
Oh, wow.
It fills the clam. It takes several weeks to months. The exact time course is a little bit different. We're seeing some variability. We've seen a couple cases that might be resistance or regression of disease. in early stages. But for the most part, when we see it take off, it just takes off, fills the animal completely, and then kills the clam. And there are cases in softshell clams, like in Prince Edward Island, where there was a big outbreak, and 90% of the animals, when they surveyed the animals, would have disease, and there was like a 90% population drop, huge die-offs in the population.
So the way it spreads, if it kills the clam so quickly, is it essentially then the dead clam just drifts apart and gets eaten by another clam? Is that how it spreads from clam to clam?
So we don't know exactly how those cells are being released, whether it's sort of an active release where they're pushing themselves out, whether they sort of, like you said, fall out when the clam dies. So there's a lot of this stuff we don't really know about, this transmission of how it really occurs.
So then this is, I think Amy's question is sort of connected in terms of the transmission. What's so special about bivalve biology that makes them so vulnerable to contagious cancer?
Yeah, so I think there may not be something all that special. These may be present in a lot of other invertebrates. I would say the two things that these transmissible cancers need, the two main features, they need a physical route for the cells to go from one to another, and they need to evade the adaptive immune system. Clams and all invertebrates, they don't have the adaptive immune system like mammals and most vertebrates do. And so that's a pretty big barrier. So that's the main barrier, that if I took cancer from an unrelated person and injected it to me, my body would clear it instantly or very quickly, because it could recognize it as non-self. And clams and invertebrates don't have an adaptive immune system. But in the ocean, there's a lot of invertebrates, and there's a lot of invertebrates that are filter feeding the water. And so I think there's potentially a lot of other transmissible cancers that we may just not be recognizing. And these are really only recognized when we see a large die-off of a commercially important clam, and then we investigate it further.
So I do want to say I'm really disappointed with how this makes me realize that song Sebastian sings in The Little Mermaid about how everything's better under the sea seems to be a lie. That's a shame. So
even the zombies are better under the sea. Depends on your point of view.
That's true. Yeah. So
well, Michael, this is a really important perspective. I think, oftentimes we don't think about what is going on under the surface, so to speak. And this whole issue, right, of being a filter feeder, that might be a little bit of a vulnerability. So maybe, we should think twice, right, before we just, eat whatever is around us. I mean, maybe that's part of the sort of zombification issue, right? Is if you're a zombie, you just eat whatever is in sight. You might encounter something that could actually maybe be a transmissible cancer from a fellow zombie.
That's a fast zombie life strategy.
It is a fast zombie life history strategy.
So
I will say one exciting thing about this is that it does look like there can be resistance, an evolution of resistance to these transmissible cancers in the population. That's one of the things we're really interested in finding out.
Interesting. So that is...
Yeah, nice. I love it when we can end on a hopeful note. We don't always get that in the zombie apocalypse. So, Michael, thank you so much for sharing your brains with us.
All right. Thank you.
So if you're a parent, you've probably noticed some changes in the way your kids have been playing since the zombie apocalypse began. And it turns out that these childhood games could help your kids survive if they're attacked by zombies. Here to share more is developmental psychologist Stephen J. Kirsh. Stephen, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me, guys. This is awesome. Now, depending on the presence or absence of caretakers and the child's age, youth will have little to no chance of surviving a single encounter with the infected, let alone living through an unending peril found on a planet overrun with the dead. In a zombie-eat-human world, children will have to defend themselves from the undead and, if necessary, seek out and destroy them. But more than that, youth will also need to learn how to hide from them and hide among them. So today, I'm going to talk about how playing games can help children and teens live alongside the living dead. Now, playing games can help youth get faster, stronger, and more coordinated. Play can teach children how to cooperate, share, and control their impulses. And across childhood and adolescence, gameplay can improve problem solving. Now, under normal circumstances, play is an essential component of children's well-being. But during the zombie apocalypse, it will do more than that. Play will help children survive. Now, when the dead rise, children won't be playing games like football or field hockey. No, they'll be playing childhood games of the apocalypse, zombie games.
So what are these zombie games?
Well, it's a good question. So one of the main functions of a zombie game is to desensitize youth, because desensitization refers to the decreased level of responsiveness to vile, disgusting, or otherwise unpleasant stimuli. And shamblers, well, they're all of those things. The Walking Dead smell of rotten ruin, they look diseased and disfigured, and they're extremely unpleasant to the touch. So desensitization will allow youth to smash a zombie's head in with impunity. Desensitized youth will be able to insert a shiv into the base of the brain of those that just died in order to quiet them and prevent the reanimation. And desensitization will make it possible for those trapped behind enemy lines to place the fetid entrails of the dead all over their bodies, wade through a field of blood and gore, and shuffle alongside a horde of flesh-eating puppies and kittens in order to escape a situation that would otherwise result in their deaths.
So I got to say, these games seem like they've got a lot of really great benefits. How exactly are they what are these games going to look like? Yeah.
Sure. First off, every game is going to actually have an undead in it. So the zombies are going to be there. But when you have them there, you got to prepare them, because you can't just have a cannibalistic corpse in among children without, disaster ensuing. So the first thing you have to do to prepare for these games is you have to remove the zombie's upper teeth and lower jaw in order to prevent a nasty bite. While you're at it, you want to remove all their fingernails and toenails to avert scratches that could prove deadly. And make sure there's no exposed bone anywhere on the shambler's body, as bone shards could impale a child during gameplay. We wouldn't want that. Safety first. Now, this next recommendation may seem cruel, but it is absolutely necessary. When a member of the community who is known to a child dies, it will be important to honor them by using their zombified husk during the zombie games. Children will need to learn very early. Let me try that again.
Sure.
Children will need to learn very early on in the apocalypse that a zombie is just a virus masquerading as someone they once knew. Now, it's never easy to kill a zombie that you were friends with in life. Practice helps.
So what other skills will children develop while playing these games?
Oh, sure. They're going to get endurance. They're going to learn tactics and teamwork. So let me tell you how. So whether it's smashing, chopping, or stabbing, or simply running away, repetition of action for prolonged periods of time will be commonplace in fighting off the living dead. So endurance will be a key to survival. Zombie games can teach youth the tactics needed to defeat walking corpses, regardless if it is a lone zombie or a horde of the undead. Now, whether through a disease bite, exsanguination, or dismemberment, the manner in which children can die during the zombie apocalypse are many and varied. Thus, the ability of a child to destroy the unconsecrated, no matter the circumstance, will be of the utmost importance. Each action of the dead should have a corresponding zombie hunter reaction. Knowing how to kill the living dead is one thing. Knowing which tactics to use in a given situation requires practice. And during childhood, what better way to practice than through active play? And finally, zombie games will help youth develop teamwork. When well-trained combat teams work together, they're able to complete more tasks than any one individual could on their own. They can take on more demanding tasks, and they can perform these tasks with fewer errors. When youth are fighting the dead, teamwork will be critical. Remember, there is no Z in team.
So we generally sort of touched on the idea of zombie games, but what are some of these games?
Sure. Well, first off, let me tell you about Whack-A-Zombie, the apocalypse version of Whack-A-Mole. And just like the game you know and love, children are given a mallet and instructed to hit an object popping out of a hole. But rather than moles emerging, the animated heads of the undead will rise. Now, for very young children, you might want to start with melons, then graduate to unanimated skulls, and finally use live zombie heads. Now, have children practice hitting with both arms, as being competent with dominant and non-dominant hands will be a lifesaver.
So wait, they should have a mallet in each hand,
They practice switching back and forth. You got to make sure you have an exercise.
Can I ask, before we move on, I know when I would play Whack-A-Mole as a kid, I would get prizes. Will there be prizes involved in Whack-A-Zombie?
I think smashing open the skull of a zombie is prize enough.
That's true. All right. So what are some of the other games?
Well, next we have zombie in the middle, which is similar to monkey in the middle, only with functioning zombies as it. Now, the goal of this game is to save friends from the clutches of the undead through distraction. As a Zed moves towards a potential victim, players attempt to divert the attention of the dead elsewhere. Now, to help children and adolescents become expert distractors, start with one rotter in the middle, and once they've added that, add additional zombies to the game. So,
oh, go ahead. Keep going.
I got like 4 more games, so we're good. We got to keep these kids alive. Now, let's talk about hide and seek with zombies. Now, a zombie's neurology requires a stimulus to trigger hunting behavior. A slight movement here, a whimper there is all you need to start the carnage. So the ability to remain still and quiet will be just as essential to survival as combat training. Now, when playing this game, standard hide and seek rules apply. And for the youngest of children, use peers as stand-ins for necrotic seekers. But for older youth and teens, and for added realism, use the living dead.
So this should be after they've played some Whack-A-Zombie, I'd assume. So
you know what? Sorry about that. Flexibility is important. I think it's more that they play the games rather than there being any specific order.
Okay.
Especially this next one, which is great for creativity. It's called MacGyver That Zombie. And yeah, it's named after the famed TV character capable of escaping any dire situation by thinking outside the box. Now, during gameplay, children can use a variety of household and found objects to create a weapon capable of piercing the skull and destroying the brain. The first person to finish their improvised skull-smashing tool shouts out the game's motto, "Everything is weaponizable." And then they rush over to a zombie's head, which has been conveniently placed in a vice, to see if they can obliterate it.
Ooh, Thanks. Sounds fun.
It does, doesn't it? All right, we got 3 more if there's time. So next, next up is Mimic the Zombie. Now, to meld in with the dead, children will need to master zombie mannerisms, including their lumbering gait and uncoordinated attempts at reaching and grasping. Now, once children become competent mimics by themselves, add real zombies to the mix. The goal of this game is to move alongside the undead without triggering their hunting behavior. And don't forget to cover the children in fresh zombie entrails and blood to mask their live human smell. All right.
Good idea.
I know, safety first, always. All right, 2 more to go. Now, zombie tag is pretty much the standard game of tag where players try to avoid being touched by the chaser. Only now, zombies are the ones in pursuit. You can play the games with any number of the undead. The more Zeds, the more difficult the game. Now, once tagged, children should leave the playing area, and the last child left untagged wins. And don't forget, for very young children, you're going to want to cut off the zombie's hands in order to prevent a potentially lethal grasp. We want kids to get tagged, but not tagged, bagged, and spiked in the head.
Yeah.
Now, last, but certainly not least, is my personal favorite, Zombie Head Dodgeball. This game is like the classic PE game and it's 5 Ds. Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge. And because you're using decapitated zombie heads instead of balls, it's another great game to desensitize you to the feel of the undead. Remember, if you can dodge a flying zombie head, you can dodge the rest of the body as well.
These seem great. Is there anything else listeners should know?
Sure. Look, children will need to grow up fast in the zombie apocalypse or they won't grow up at all. And when done correctly, zombie games will do 3 things that will help youth survive the scourge of the undead. Number 1, zombie games will desensitize youth to the sights, sounds, smells, and tactile sensations of the living dead. Number 2, zombie games will help children become proficient at evading, distracting, and mimicking the mortally challenged. And number 3, zombie games will teach children how to efficiently kill walkers. Now, when played correctly, zombie games will help prepare youth for the monsters under the bed, in the closet, behind the door, and surrounding the house. Thanks. That's all of them.
Those sound great. I got to say, are these just for kids? Because it seems like, grown-ups. Yeah,
we're all kids at heart. I can see myself enjoying whack-a-mole or zombie head dodgeball. I broke a finger in 2nd grade playing dodgeball, so zombie head shouldn't be that much tougher.
Yeah, I think also that sort of like zombie in the middle, that seems like it's fun from ages, 4 to 104. So
And it's teaching you important life skills.
yeah, it is. So it is true. So I mean, on top of, well, thank you so much for sharing those really fun games. I think that'll be a great way to also lighten up the apocalypse.
Yeah. Although I don't think any child is going to get through those unscathed. There's going to be a lot of trauma and need for therapy after this.
Yeah, but it'll, like we say, it'll be one of those true competitions where the strongest kids will survive.
There you go.
Oh, and there is a psychological price to pay for, growing up in the zombie apocalypse. I think the question is just, how do we make sure that all kids have a fair chance? So thanks, Stephen, so much for sharing your brains.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Now, have you ever danced with a zombie? If
Maybe.
you have, you might have actually been surprised at their ability to entrain to the rhythm, despite the fact that they have trouble walking. Jessica Phillips-Silver is a neuroscientist, musician, and dancer who is here to tell us more about this surprising behavior of zombies on the dance floor. Jessica, welcome to Undead Live.
Hi, Athena. Thank you so much.
Can you tell us a little bit about zombies and their sort of surprising rhythmic abilities?
Yeah, I would love to. This is something I've been thinking about for a very long time. I want to start with a question of why do zombies dance? I mean, really start from the beginning. And we know from the study of zombie dance and music behavior that rhythm is a tool for mutual social entrainment. So specifically, coming together in time and in space to get things done. It's kind of echoing off of the message of Steve just before me about teamwork, right? This idea of teamwork, how we really cooperate, perform joint action, and get things done together. And so there's a clear understanding about why zombies choose to dance. But of course, there's a very special characteristic we all know that really describes zombie dance in particular as a style, and that is the sort of jerkiness, which is really, an expression of essentially motor impairments. It's called dyskinesia, so zombie dyskinesia. And there's some debate about what that is attributable to. It could be possibly due to early in-tomb decay of motor brain regions and their connections with basal ganglia and cerebellum, kind of similar to, what you might see in Parkinson's. Or it could be something more closely like what's called musician's dystonia, where a musician who plays an instrument very, very repeatedly will get a cramp.
Oh, I think the zombie apocalypse is interfering with our connection. I'm not sure if Jessica's actually been dancing with zombies in her house, and that might be part of the problem. I mean, she's really interested in this from a research perspective. Right. So I fear that
she was just saying that there's a risk, right, when you do movements over and over. So hopefully she'll be all right. But
yeah, well, while we're waiting for her to come back in, I mean, I can tell you that. So I've danced with Jessica. We're both dance instructors. At least I used to be, and she has an uncanny ability not just to dance and entrain with the rhythm, but to entrain with lots of individuals. And her, I'm wondering if she's actually discovered something that we might not have realized about zombies, which is that, if they are able to entrain in the way that she is suggesting that they're able to, they might be able to entrain with each other, which would allow them to accomplish collective goals that, could really change the landscape of how we want to deal with zombies.
Oh, like putting on entire dance shows?
Well, I mean, maybe that's a good way that that could be channeled, right? So that they would be putting on dance shows rather than using their collective movement abilities to overtake us,
trap us. Yeah, that's much worse. So, yeah, that's true. Well, maybe we'll be able to go back to her in a few minutes. But do we want to bring Jeff on? And
Yeah, let's get our zombie health correspondent. So, Jeff Gasson, you are really the world's expert in zombie health. And so you've heard a lot of sort of diverse issues tonight in terms of zombie health. What are your thoughts about all of these topics, and what should we be doing right now to protect ourselves and perhaps also zombies?
That's a fantastic question. So first, I just want to apologize in the event that you guys hear any crying in the background. That's my daughter who's recently born. And actually, it's a great situation right now, given that I have a small newborn baby. So if she becomes a zombie, it's really not that big of a deal. She's kind of just hanging out in her bassinet, just sort of like moving around slowly, making nondescript noises. Breastfeeding becomes a problem if she turns, but it is what it is. As far as sort of zombie health in the context of what everybody's saying here, I'm just going to kind of derail things a little bit. And a lot of people have been kind of talking about, what are zombies? Why are zombies? But I haven't heard a lot of questions about how are zombies. You know what I mean?
It's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so I studied human health for a long time. By a long time, I mean a few years, because I haven't been in science that long. But, I kind of transitioned, and it was sort of this idea that I saw this kind of apocalypse coming, and I don't really have a lot of defenses. Like, I kind of have the Batesian mimicry going on. Like, I look like I'm kind of tough. I got the tattoos, the horror movie tattoos and stuff, but I'm like a total softie. I love Celine Dion. I went squirrel hunting once. It went horribly. I mean, it went great for the squirrel. No squirrels injured in the event of that hunting, just, my ego. But, I saw this kind of the future of this sort of space where zombies and humans could coexist. And there are a lot of benefits to sort of the zombie way of life, including, thank you, Athena, for noting that I do love Celine Dion, including, zombies get a lot of cardio. They eat keto. They eat what they hunt. And I think that humans in general, instead of sort of demonizing the zombie way of life, can learn a lot from that sort of perspective.
That's a good point. I also, when you think about it, zombies would keep the human population in check, which I think is one of the really nice things about hunting in general. Right?
Absolutely. There's from a wildlife management perspective, zombies are a pretty good deal. I actually talked to a guy the other day who's a zombie. His name's Lars. And he told me, people like to think that life's pretty easy for a zombie. It's all just, jump roping and biting humans in the neck, but it's really not that way. He told me, which, of course, in zombie translates to Jeff. Things haven't been great. My wife left me. My kids won't eat anything but chicken nuggets and, French guys. And things aren't great. And so I think that a little empathy would go a long way in the context of sort of this arms race, this, perceived arms race between zombies and humans.
So what do you think we can do to sort of give them a little more empathy and to sort of meet them halfway?
Well, I think many speakers in this conference have talked about the fact that zombies are still just humans, sort of either plus or minus, depending on how you want to look at it, which is humans modified. And so I think that we just need to sort of adopt that same sort of perspective when we're dealing with zombies that we do with other humans who don't necessarily have control over their individual circumstances and things that are happening to their bodies, which applies to a whole range of circumstances in human disease and other sorts of human ailments as well.
Thank you, Jeff. So I think we have Jessica
back now
here with us. Jessica, what happened?
I got attacked.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
So you have
nowhere and had no rhythm at all.
Did he seem like he was going through any sort of stressful circumstances? Did you take a moment to ask how he was doing?
Yeah, she was enraged and was complaining of a lack of appreciation, basically a complete misunderstanding of her intentions and her ability to really communicate through her motor behavior, which is really what I was trying to get at when I was talking about their their zombies dance behavior.
So I think.
Mhm.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think right when you were attacked, you were telling us that musicians that sort of practice things over and over,
Yeah.
they cramp, and then that was the last.
Yeah, they get right,
so.
exactly. So that was just an illustration of kind of the considerations of where this this characteristic of zombie dyskinesia might come from. But there's another characteristic that's more important actually, but very, very seems to be overlooked, which is that zombies actually show excellent synchronization. So when they tend to dance in groups. I mean, you never see a zombie dancing alone, do you? I don't. And they really show strong rhythmic entrainment. They listen to the beat and they really move in a very synchronized fashion. Yeah.
We have one of our questions here, comments is, what is entrainment exactly?
Yeah, so that's actually the most important question to me. Entrainment really reflects the basic ability to synchronize together. And, in music entrainment, that really occurs in two specific ways that are very important for the musicality. One is synchronizing in time. So when the song comes on and we start moving in time, we start moving together, it's important that we're both on the beat. But the other aspect is that, we show a type of emotional synchrony, right? We synchronize in affect. And I think this is what, the zombie who just attacked me was I could just make out from her, from her very rage-filled expressions and screaming, was that she was really feeling a very deep lack of appreciation of zombies' ability to actually convey affect and social cohesion.
So Jessica, this ties in actually with a question that's been coming up over and over again over the last 2 days, which is this issue of zombie language and communication. So some people are sort of arguing that, essentially the inability of zombies to verbalize using language that we're familiar with basically because they're not human. But others are pointing out that, indeed, zombies may have other ways of communicating. And Jeff, you were just telling us actually about talking to a zombie the other day. So you figured out how to communicate with them despite the fact that they are not using language in the way that we do.
Well, certainly it's not something that happens overnight. You spend a lot of time with somebody and you start to pick up on their tendencies and idiosyncrasies, and you can kind of get a feel for what their their desires are and things like that, and what they're trying to say. But
So it sounds like, Jeff, you're tuning into a lot of other aspects and maybe in training with the zombie. So Jessica, is this have to do with communication?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this would be in the field of communication when they study entrainment. They don't typically use that word, but they'll use words like synchrony, right? And there's a very important timing aspect to the sort of communicative synchrony that happens between individuals. You can also think of a zombie parent and child, right? So prelingual zombies, whom I have studied, they're a fascinating population. They don't have the linguistic ability to communicate, but there's a lot that gets conveyed through their behaviors and actions still occurring in time and space. So still having a very strong temporal aspect. And this, of course, relies, whether we're talking about zombie language or music, it relies on a very important brain network that essentially has to do with auditory motor integration. And I argue auditory vestibulomotor integration. So really a widespread network that has to do with—
What is auditory vestibular? Tell me what that means.
So integrating the vestibular system, including the vestibular system in this—
What is the vestibular system?
Oh, the vestibular system is in the inner ear. It's responsible for our sense of balance and our acceleration and position in space. So relation to gravity. And so, if you ever experience dizziness from, a horrible dance partner, it's probably triggering the vestibular system. So, but the important thing is that there's this network that's really responsible for timing that's deeply involved in certainly in language communication, but especially in music, because of the importance of that rhythmic beat in keeping people together.
Wow. So what does this mean for how we should be thinking about zombies differently? Are they, because we tend to think of them as kind of a, mindless horde, certainly not coordinated. Does this make them more of a threat or less of a threat?
Oh, they're a threat. I mean, there's two important things here. One is that they, unlike living dancers, a certain proportion of whom show a music-specific disorder called beat deafness, where they actually cannot perceive the beat in music and synchronize with it. Zombies do not, there's no reported case of a beat-deaf zombie, right? And yet, there's also no known cases of living beat-deaf individuals that show this degree of dyskinesia and motor impairment. So we see actually a double dissociation here, which gives us some insight into the neuromechanisms underlying, basically a variety of dance behaviors. So they're definitely a threat in terms of always being on top of their game synchronization-wide. But the other piece here that they really, I think, want more recognition for is that if you know where to look, they do convey affect in their movements. And so this idea of the lack of affect in zombies, the sort of the idea that they're numb or that they're completely devoid of emotion because of the facial expression, right? That's actually a myth that was debunked when researchers discovered zombie hypomimia, loss of facial expression, which is another form of dyskinesia.
Wow.
So unbeknownst to us, they are actually guarding a very deep sense of affect and potential for coalition. We need to know how to look for the signals, and that's where we could be at a major disadvantage here.
Jessica, that's fascinating. One last question before we finish, which is, when you were being attacked by the zombie, we were discussing the possibility here that this entrainment ability of zombies could potentially be channeled into a zombie dance troupe, as opposed to having zombies, being a threat to us when they entrain. Is that something that you would suggest, or are you thinking actually about putting together any such zombie dance group?
Yeah, I mean, some of this information is under embargo at the moment, but I do want to stress that I think the takeaway here from my research and this field in general is that in a zombie apocalypse, a major strategy for cooperation would be to join in the dance. And all we have to do is just find the rhythm. That's all we have to do. It's very simple. So I will say that I'm on Team Z. Mm-hmm.
Well, Jessica, thank you very, very much. And thank you all for joining us tonight for the evening edition of Undead Live. Join us later this evening for a no-brainer zombie quiz hosted by Trivial Dispute. Check your daily emails from Christina for the sign-up sheet. Registration closes an hour before the event starts because our host is going to need to sort us into teams, so sign up now. But before that, we will be back at 7 with our featured speakers and our musical guest, Baba Brinkman, on Late Night Brains. He'll be giving us a wrap-up of the day and also a sneak preview of the second half, of Zombie Anthem. We'll see you on Late Night Brains.
It's crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural with you.